Rachel Miller sat in front of the vanity mirror in her dimly lit bedroom, staring at her own reflection as if trying to recognize the woman she had become. Her once bright hazel eyes now held a dullness, shadowed by years of neglect, not by others, but by herself. The girl she used to be, the one who laughed freely, the one who dreamed, had long faded into the background. In her place was a woman who moved through life in quiet servitude, existing but not truly living. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The kids had gone to bed, and Andrew, her husband of 15 years, was still out. He was always out these days, leaving early in the morning, returning late at night, his excuses well practiced and smooth. Meetings ran late. Clients needed extra time. Work is just too demanding right now. All lies Rachel no longer questioned. Once upon a time, she would have asked. She would have worried. But now she just let it be. It was easier that way. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she reached for the hairbrush on the vanity. As she ran it through her dark brown hair, she noticed the streaks of silver growing at the roots. Aging. It was happening to her, and she had no way to stop it. It wasn't just the grays. It was the fine lines around her eyes, the extra softness in her cheeks, the slight weight gain that clung to her midsection after 2 children. She knew she wasn't the same woman Andrew had married. But then again, neither was he the same man. Once, he had looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. His eyes had softened when she laughed. His hands had reached for hers without hesitation. Now, he barely looked at her at all. The front door opened, breaking the stillness of the night. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of Andrew tossing his keys onto the kitchen counter. Rachel stayed where she was, not turning to greet him, not even calling out his name. She waited. She could hear the rustling of his suit jacket, the soft clink of a glass as he poured himself a drink. Then his voice, calm, collected, indifferent. "I need you to do something for me." Rachel swallowed and finally turned in her chair, facing him. Andrew stood in the doorway, looking as polished as ever. His dark gray suit was perfectly tailored, his blonde hair styled with care. He was still as handsome as the day they met, but there was something cold in his features now, something distant. "What is it?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "There's a gala next weekend," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Very high profile. All the company's investors will be there." Rachel felt a small flutter of anticipation. It had been years since Andrew had taken her anywhere important. Maybe this was a chance to feel like his wife again, to feel seen. "I'll need to get a dress," she said hesitantly. "I haven't." Andrew cut her off with a shake of his head. "No, Rachel, you're not going." The room felt like it had shrunk. Rachel's stomach twisted, her breath catching in her throat. She blinked, as if she had misheard him. I don't understand." Andrew took a slow sip of his drink before setting the glass down. "This is a business event. Image is everything. I need to be seen with someone. Polished." The words hit her like a slap. She felt her heart pound against her ribs, but she refused to let the hurt show. "Polished," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Andrew sighed, as if she was making this harder than it needed to be. "I'm taking Olivia." The name burned in her ears. Olivia, his secretary. Young, vibrant, perfectly put together. Rachel had met her a handful of times, always in passing, always with a polite but distant smile. She felt her fingers grip the edge of the vanity, steadying herself. "Your secretary. She knows how to present herself," Andrew said, as if that justified everything. "She'll fit in." Rachel stared at him, waiting for a punchline, for some sign that this was a cruel joke. But Andrew simply picked up his drink and walked away, leaving her alone in the silence once again. Something inside her cracked. She had spent years brushing off the small betrayals, swallowing her pride, convincing herself that she was imagining the distance growing between them. But this was different. This was humiliation, and Andrew didn't even care. Rachel looked back at the mirror. For the first time in years, she saw herself clearly. And for the first time in years, she realized she wasn't going to just accept it. Rachel woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't sadness, though the ache of last night's humiliation still clung to her like a shadow. It wasn't anger either, even though she had every reason to be furious. No, this was something different. It was the quiet, simmering realization that something had shifted inside her, like a dormant ember finally catching fire. She moved through her morning routine on autopilot, making breakfast for the kids, packing their lunches, and forcing a smile when they kissed her goodbye on their way to school. She didn't want them to see the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. When the house was finally empty, Rachel stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the perfectly polished countertops, the gleaming appliances, the neatly arranged cabinets, everything in its place, just like she had always been. Everything controlled, predictable, safe. But she wasn't safe, was she? Safety was an illusion. She had spent years believing that if she was a good wife, a good mother, if she sacrificed enough, Andrew would always love her. She had believed that love was about devotion, about patience, about compromise. But last night had shattered that illusion into pieces so sharp, they cut straight through her heart. She could still hear his voice, cool and indifferent. "I need to be seen with someone polished." Rachel clenched her fists. She had never been one for vanity, but did that mean she had deserved this? Deserved to be cast aside, dismissed like an outdated accessory? No. The realization settled deep within her, solid and unshakable. No more. For the first time in years, she wasn't just going to endure. She wasn't going to fade into the background while Andrew paraded his secretary around like some trophy. She wasn't going to spend another moment pretending that this was okay. Rachel walked to the mirror in the hallway, the one she usually avoided. She studied herself in the reflection. The tired eyes, the loose-fitting sweater, the hair she hadn't bothered to style in years. But beneath all of that, she saw something else. A woman who had given so much of herself to a man who never appreciated her. A woman who had been told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that she was not enough. But what if she was? What if she had always been? The fire inside her blazed hotter. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she hadn't called in years. With a deep breath, she pressed dial. It rang twice before a warm, familiar voice answered. "Rachel? Wow, I wasn't expecting your call. How have you been?" Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. "Hey, Lisa. I need your help." Lisa had been her best friend in college, the kind of friend who never let her settle for less, who had always pushed her to see her own worth. But life had happened. Marriage, kids, responsibilities. Over the years, Rachel had let their friendship fade, too caught up in being a wife and mother to make time for herself. But she knew Lisa would understand. Lisa always understood. "Of course," Lisa said without hesitation. "What's going on?" Rachel hesitated, then forced the words out. "I need a transformation." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Lisa's voice lit up with excitement. "Oh, honey, I thought you'd never ask." That was how it started. That same afternoon, Rachel met Lisa at an upscale boutique downtown, the kind of place she had always walked past, but never dared to enter. The moment she stepped inside, she felt out of place, her worn jeans and oversized sweater clashing with the sleek, sophisticated atmosphere. But Lisa wouldn't let her retreat. "First rule," Lisa said, linking her arm through Rachel's. "You belong here. You deserve to be here." Rachel swallowed hard and nodded. The next few hours were a blur of fabric, colors, and mirrors. For the first time in years, she let herself be the center of attention. She tried on dresses that hugged her curves in ways she had forgotten they could. She slipped into heels that added an inch of confidence to her posture. She let the stylists work their magic, shaping her hair into soft waves, bringing out the warmth in her complexion with subtle makeup. And when she finally looked at herself in the mirror, she felt something tighten in her chest. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, but the woman staring back at her now, she was undeniable. Lisa grinned. Now that is the Rachel I remember. Rachel smiled, but this time, it wasn't forced. For the first time in a long time, she felt powerful. As she stepped out of the boutique, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about a dress. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming herself. Rachel stood in front of her closet, running her fingers over the rows of clothes that no longer felt like hers. Faded sweaters, loose-fitting jeans, dresses she had bought years ago, with practicality in mind. Nothing in here reflected the woman she was becoming. For years, she had dressed to blend in, to be comfortable, to avoid standing out. But now, after the afternoon she had spent with Lisa, something had shifted inside her. She stepped back, her gaze landing on the sleek garment bag hanging on the door. Inside was the dress that made her feel like she belonged, the dress that erased every whispered insult, every dismissive glance, every moment of invisibility. A deep red masterpiece, bold, striking, and nothing like the muted colors she had spent the last decade hiding behind. She wasn't just dressing up for a gala. She was stepping into the version of herself she had long forgotten. Rachel exhaled, the weight of years lifting slightly from her shoulders. A sudden knock on the bedroom door made her heart jump. "Mom." Olivia's small voice drifted through. Rachel quickly zipped up the garment bag and turned to open the door. Her 9-year-old daughter stood there, clutching a stuffed bunny, her blue eyes filled with curiosity. "What are you doing?" Olivia asked, peeking around the room. Rachel smiled, kneeling down so they were at eye level. "Just getting some things ready." "For what?" Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to say. The last thing she wanted was for her children to feel caught in the silent battle brewing between their parents. "For something important," she said finally. "Something for me." Olivia studied her for a long moment before smiling. "Good," she said simply, wrapping her arms around Rachel's neck. Rachel hugged her tightly, closing her eyes. Maybe Olivia didn't know the details, but she understood more than Rachel realized. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Rachel sat at the dining table, sipping tea as she stared at the calendar. The gala was in 3 days. That meant in 72 hours, Andrew would walk into the grand ballroom with his secretary on his arm, believing he had discarded his wife like an outdated accessory. He had no idea what was coming. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Lisa. Ready for the final step. Rachel's fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed back, "Absolutely." The next morning, she walked into the most exclusive spa in the city. Lisa had set up everything: hair, makeup, skin treatments, even a personal stylist. Rachel barely recognized the woman in the mirror by the time they were done. Her hair was perfectly styled, cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. Her eyes, once tired and dim, now sparkled with an intensity she had forgotten she possessed. Lisa grinned as Rachel stepped out in a fitted black dress, a temporary outfit for the day. "Andrew is going to lose his mind when he sees you." Rachel smirked, a confidence she hadn't felt in years bubbling up inside her. Good. That night, she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone when Andrew finally came home. She didn't look up as he walked in, tossing his keys on the counter. "You'll need to get the kids from school on Friday," he said casually, loosening his tie. "I'll be busy with the gala." Rachel didn't respond right away. Instead, she locked her phone and slowly turned to face him. "Actually, I have plans on Friday." Andrew frowned. "What plans?" She took a slow sip of her tea, letting the silence stretch. "I'll be at the gala." He blinked, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Rachel, it's a formal event." "I know." His smile faltered slightly. "I don't think you understand. This isn't." "I do understand. She interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "And I already have my invitation." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Who gave you an invitation?" Rachel stood, picking up her empty teacup and walking past him to the kitchen. Over her shoulder, she said simply, "Your boss." She didn't need to turn around to see his stunned expression. She could feel it. Andrew stood frozen in the middle of the living room, his tie still loosened, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and irritation. Rachel didn't look back at him as she rinsed her teacup in the sink, but she could feel the tension in the air thickening, wrapping around them like an invisible storm. "My boss," he finally said, his voice laced with confusion. "Rachel, what are you talking about?" Rachel took her time, placing the cup on the drying rack before turning around. She met his gaze head-on, something she hadn't done in a long time. "Yes, Mr. Sinclair." Andrew's face paled slightly. "Sinclair personally invited you to the gala." She almost laughed at the way he said it, like it was impossible, like the idea of her attending the most prestigious event of the year was some sort of joke. "That's right." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his irritation now clear. "Rachel, you don't even know Sinclair." She tilted her head slightly, letting a small, knowing smile play at her lips. "Don't I?" Andrew opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly at a loss for words. The truth was, Rachel had met James Sinclair before, years ago, at a company event when Andrew had actually cared enough to introduce her to people. Back then, Sinclair had been nothing more than a polite acquaintance, but that had changed recently. After Andrew's humiliating declaration that she wasn't polished enough to attend, Rachel had taken matters into her own hands. She reached out to Sinclair's wife, Eleanor, an old friend of Lisa's, and reconnected over coffee. What started as casual conversation soon turned into something more. A real connection, a newfound respect. And then the invitation had come. Andrew didn't know any of this, of course. He had been too busy underestimating her. His silence stretched for several seconds before he let out a humorless laugh. "I suppose Lisa had something to do with this." Rachel's lips curled slightly, but she didn't answer. Let him think what he wanted. Let him try to piece together how the woman he had dismissed was suddenly walking in circles he thought were beyond her reach. Andrew stepped forward, his brows furrowed. "Rachel, you have to understand. This isn't personal. It's business. People at these events expect a certain image." Ah, there it was again. Image. Rachel folded her arms across her chest, her gaze unwavering. "And what image do I give off, Andrew?" He hesitated. "Rachel, come on." "No," she cut in, her voice calm but sharp. "Say it. What is it about me that you were so embarrassed by?" Andrew exhaled, looking away, rubbing the back of his neck as if searching for the right words. Rachel could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to admit it out loud. He had never expected to be confronted. He had thought she would simply accept his decision, the way she always had. When he didn't answer, she stepped closer. "Was it my appearance? My age? The fact that I wasn't arm candy for your investors?" His silence was all the confirmation she needed. Rachel let out a slow, measured breath. "You know what, Andrew? For years, I let myself fade into the background because I thought that's what a good wife was supposed to do. I thought if I was supportive, if I was patient, if I put my needs second, it would be enough. But you never saw me, did you?" Andrew swallowed hard, his posture stiff. "That's not fair." She let out a bitter chuckle. "Not fair." She took another step toward him, her voice unwavering. "What's not fair is that I spent years standing by your side, only for you to cast me aside like I was an afterthought." Andrew's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. Rachel turned away, her decision now more solid than ever. "I'll see you at the gala." And with that, she walked past him, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. The night of the gala arrived faster than Rachel had expected, but she was ready. For the first time in years, she wasn't just attending an event. She was making an entrance. As she stepped out of the black car and onto the red carpet, cameras flashed and heads turned. The deep red gown she had chosen hugged her figure perfectly, its elegance undeniable. Her hair cascaded in soft waves over her shoulder, her makeup subtle yet striking. She wasn't the timid wife hiding in the background anymore. She was a woman reborn. As she made her way toward the entrance, a hush fell over the crowd inside. People whispered, some in recognition, others in pure disbelief. And then she saw him. Andrew stood near the bar, his arm loosely draped around Olivia, the secretary. The younger woman was dressed in a shimmering silver gown, looking every bit the polished image he had wanted. But the second he saw Rachel, his grip on Olivia's waist faltered. His eyes widened, his jaw tightening. He wasn't expecting this. Rachel met his gaze and did something she hadn't done in years. She smiled. And then, without sparing him another glance, she turned and walked into the ballroom, where James Sinclair and his wife were waiting to welcome her. Rachel felt the power in every step as she moved through the grand ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive champagne and freshly cut flowers, the murmur of high society conversations filling the space. Crystal chandeliers hung above her, casting golden light over the elegantly dressed guests. But none of it mattered. Because tonight, she wasn't here to impress anyone. She wasn't here to fit into Andrew's world. She was here because she belonged. She reached the far side of the ballroom where James Sinclair and his wife, Eleanor, stood, engaged in conversation with a group of executives. As soon as Eleanor spotted Rachel, her face lit up. "Rachel, darling, you look exquisite," Eleanor said, stepping forward to take her hands. Rachel smiled, feeling genuine warmth in the other woman's touch. "Thank you. I owe you for this invitation." "Nonsense," Eleanor waved a hand. "I invited you because you deserve to be here." James Sinclair, a tall man with a quiet but commanding presence, turned toward Rachel with an appraising look. "My wife has told me quite a bit about you," he said, offering a polite smile. "It seems we've been underestimating you all these years." Rachel returned the smile, feeling the weight of his words. Underestimating. Yes, that had been the theme of her marriage, hadn't it? Before she could respond, she felt the weight of a gaze burning into her back. Andrew. She turned her head slightly, catching sight of him standing stiffly near the bar. Olivia, his secretary, was still at his side, but her expression was uncertain now. Andrew, on the other hand, looked completely thrown off. His brows were furrowed, his mouth slightly parted, his drink untouched. Good. Rachel turned away, giving him no further attention. He had spent years treating her as an afterthought. Now, he was the one fading into the background. Eleanor leaned in and whispered, "Your husband looks like he's seen a ghost." Rachel let out a soft chuckle. "Let him." James, who had been observing the exchange with amusement, cleared his throat. "Rachel, I'd like to introduce you to someone. A very important guest tonight." Rachel turned just as a distinguished-looking older man approached. He had silver hair, sharp eyes, and the air of someone who had built an empire from the ground up. "Rachel, this is Henry Lawson," James said, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "One of the most respected investors in the industry. Henry, meet Rachel Miller." Rachel extended her hand, but before Lawson could take it, he let out a surprised laugh. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, studying her with curiosity. "You're Rachel Miller, Andrew Miller's wife." The words held no insult, only intrigue, but Rachel couldn't ignore the shift in the conversation. She glanced at James and Eleanor, who both looked equally entertained. Rachel kept her posture relaxed. "That's right. At least for now." Lawson chuckled. "I've been working with Andrew for years, and not once has he mentioned having a wife who commands this kind of presence." Rachel's smile didn't waver. "That doesn't surprise me." Lawson gave a thoughtful nod. "Well, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. In fact, I'd love to hear your perspective on something." And just like that, Rachel found herself drawn into an engaging conversation, one she never would have been included in before. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just someone's wife. She was Rachel Miller, and people were listening. Across the room, Andrew's grip on his glass tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. Rachel wasn't supposed to be here. And she certainly wasn't supposed to be standing next to James Sinclair, charming the most powerful people in the room. His throat felt dry as he watched her laughing lightly at something Henry Lawson said. She was radiant, completely unrecognizable from the woman he had left behind. His secretary, Olivia, shifted uncomfortably beside him. "She looks different," she murmured. Andrew barely heard her. His mind was racing. How did this happen? How did Rachel get here? He had been so certain that she would accept her place, that she would quietly stay home while he built the life he wanted. But instead, she had stepped into a world he thought she'd never belonged to, and she was thriving. He needed to fix this. Andrew set his glass down abruptly. "Stay here," he told Olivia, already making his way across the room. Rachel was mid-conversation when she felt a familiar presence beside her. "Rachel," Andrew's voice cut in. She turned slowly, her expression composed. "Andrew." Silence stretched between them. Eleanor, always one to enjoy a little drama, took a sip of her wine and said to James, "Darling, I think we should give them a moment." James nodded in agreement, giving Rachel an encouraging look before stepping away with his wife and the others. Now it was just Rachel and Andrew, standing in the middle of the most prestigious event of the year. He looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. "You didn't tell me you were coming." Rachel arched a brow. "Would you have cared?" His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "Fair." She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You mean like the way you told me I wasn't polished enough to be seen with you? Like the way you paraded your secretary around instead of your own wife?" Andrew's face darkened. "Rachel, I never meant to." "But you did," she interrupted, her voice steady. "You made me feel invisible, Andrew. Like I was nothing." A flicker of regret passed through his eyes. I didn't think you cared about these things." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "And that was your mistake." He swallowed hard, his confidence wavering. "Rachel, let's just talk. In private." She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "There's nothing left to talk about." Andrew's expression fell slightly, but before he could respond, another voice interrupted. "Rachel, darling, there you are." Rachel turned to see Henry Lawson returning, a warm smile on his face. He barely spared Andrew a glance before placing a hand on Rachel's arm. "Would you mind accompanying me? I have someone I'd like you to meet." Rachel smiled and nodded. Then, just before walking away, she looked back at Andrew one last time. And with a quiet, final certainty, she said, "Goodbye, Andrew." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the past where he belonged. Rachel walked with grace and purpose, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her like a cloak of quiet triumph. Every step away from Andrew was a step toward something new, toward herself. Henry Lawson led her toward a small, exclusive gathering in the corner of the ballroom. The people standing there weren't just guests. They were powerhouses, CEOs, investors, and business owners who made the world move. And now she was standing among them. "Everyone," Henry said, placing a hand on Rachel's shoulder, "I'd like you to meet Rachel Miller. She has a fascinating perspective on corporate development, and I think she could bring something fresh to the table." Rachel blinked in surprise. This was more than just an introduction. This was an invitation. The man standing beside Henry, a well-dressed executive with a calculating gaze, studied her for a moment before extending his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Rachel. I've heard a bit about you from James and Eleanor." Rachel shook his hand firmly, her mind racing. She had spent so many years shrinking herself to fit into Andrew's expectations, never once considering that she had value beyond being a supportive wife. But now she was being seen, not as Andrew's wife, not as someone's background character, but as Rachel Miller. As the conversations unfolded, she realized something incredible. She had insights to share. Her years of being a silent observer in Andrew's world had given her knowledge she never knew she possessed. She spoke about business strategies, company culture, and the importance of ethical leadership, and people listened. She wasn't just being humored. She was being respected. Halfway through the discussion, Eleanor leaned in and whispered, "You do realize you just outshone your husband, don't you?" Rachel smiled knowingly. "Good." Across the room, Andrew stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with disbelief. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. Rachel was supposed to be at home, waiting for him like she always did. She was supposed to be invisible, forgotten. But instead, she was standing in the most exclusive circle of the event, laughing with people who had never once acknowledged him in such a way. Olivia, his secretary, shifted uncomfortably beside him. "She seems different." Andrew clenched his jaw. "She's making a fool of herself." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. She wasn't making a fool of herself. He was the fool for never seeing her worth until it was too late. And then it hit him, like a punch to the gut. He had lost her. Not just as a wife, but as someone who had once believed in him, supported him, and stood by his side. She wasn't coming back. Rachel didn't need him anymore. By the end of the night, Rachel was standing outside the grand venue, her heart still pounding from the whirlwind of the evening. Lisa approached her, arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "Well, I think it's safe to say that was a success." Rachel exhaled, nodding. It was. Lisa tilted her head, studying her. "So, what now?" Rachel glanced back at the ballroom doors, as if looking at the past one final time. Then she smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "Now," she said, stepping forward, her confidence unwavering. "Now, I start living for me." And with that, she walked away, toward a future that belonged entirely to her.